I would like to welcome architect Rohan Shivkumar sir for an informative interactive session on architectural filmmaking and direction. So he will share his journey in the field of architecture and design and will take you into the creative world of architectural filmmaking. So architectural filmmaking and direction, they play a vital role in the world of architecture and design, offering a unique perspective on the built environment. And this field serves as a powerful medium for conveying the essence of architecture. So while the traditional architecture photography captures static images of buildings, films have the ability to bring architecture to life through motion, sound, and storytelling. So through careful composition, lighting, and camera movements, filmmakers can highlight the dynamic qualities of a structure, emphasizing its relationship with the surrounding environment, the play of light and shadow, and the user experience. So this dynamic this presentation, it allows the viewers to gain a deeper understanding into the architectural intent and emotional impact of the space. And furthermore, this creative field can be an invaluable tool for documenting the evolution of architecture over time. So, by creating documentary films and architectural films, architects and filmmakers can actually chronicle the construction and transformation of cities, the preservation of historical landmarks, and the innovative solutions to contemporary urban challenges. So these kind of films, they actually serve as valuable historical records as well, enabling future generations to learn from the past and inspire new ideas for the future. So several architectural documentaries and films, they tend to shed light on the stories behind iconic buildings and iconic people in our fraternity, and even the urban developments, fostering a greater appreciation for the complex history of architecture. And definitely, it can inspire people to work towards the greater cause in the design fraternity and beyond. So, on this note, I would like to introduce and warmly welcome our speaker for today, architect Rohan Shivkumar sir. So, Rohan Shivkumar sir is an architect, urban designer, and filmmaker practicing in Mumbai. He is the Dean of Architecture course at the Kamla Raheja Vidyanidhi Institute for Architecture and Environmental Studies. And he is also the principal of the Architectural and Urban Practice, the Collaborative Design Studio, and is a member of CODES, an urban research collective based in Mumbai. And his work ranges from architecture, urban research, and consultancy projects to works in film and visual art. And he's interested in issues concerning housing, public spaces, and in exploring in many ways of reading and representing the city. And he has worked on many research and consultancy projects in the city of Mumbai in collaboration with governmental and non governmental organizations, including projects like the Churchgate Revival Project and the Tourist District Project. So, through the school, he has worked on research projects in Dharavi and the spaces of Dr. Ambedkar in Mumbai. Rohan sir is the co-editor of the publication on an interdisciplinary research and art collaboration project Cinema City. And he also curates film programs and writes on cinema, architecture, and urban issues. And he has also made films on art, architecture, and urbanism, including Nostalgia for the Future, Lovely Villa, and Squeeze Lime in Your Eye. So, one of which actually we are going to have a special screening today after his talk session. So, respected Rohan sir, a very warm welcome again to you on Gracing IDA 3.0. And we are really honored to have you as a speaker in our session, and our eager audience is awaiting your address.
Thank you, Kamalaja, and thank you everyone at IIDA. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here, and this may be really the first time that I've been asked to speak of my work in film. So that itself is kind of interesting because this really prompted me to think about what my practice in film was in relationship with my architectural interests. I really started thinking about what was the overlap between the two disciplines and how each could, in many ways, productively inform the other. Maybe, in this, I guess, hour or so, I can try and unpack some of these relationships and exchanges. As I've started to think about this, I realized that while architecture seems to deal with form as it works in space, cinema seems to work with form as it works in time. In fact, the famous Russian filmmaker called Andrei Tarkovsky, called cinema, in fact, sculpting in time. He likened, how a sculptor makes kind of shapes in a rock. Um, Tarkovsky suggested that a filmmaker makes shapes in time. And I love that idea. But what seemed to draw both of these kinds of ideas together was that, both of them seemed to kind of come together in this idea of narrative, where space and time meet sometimes with the presence or sometimes even without the presence of bodies, like stories. In both architecture and in cinema, we tell stories. Okay, and these are the stories that we choose to tell ourselves, of the people we choose to center and decenter, in the histories and mythologies we choose to write about our place in the world. um, but we also tell stories in and through architecture. In cinema, naturally, we are telling these stories. In architecture, I believe that in the buildings that we build, in the drawings that we make of them, we tell stories of possible futures, possible pasts. We project what we can be in the buildings that we want to live in. As you know, I'm mainly a teacher, and early in my career as an architect, I had a decision. My architectural practice had just started. I just started getting architectural projects in Mumbai. I even built a fire station. And I was on the verge of building I guess you could call a conventional practice in Bombay. I was teaching at the KRVIA at the same time, and they asked me to join as a full time faculty member. At that time, I had to make a decision and I had to decide where my priorities lay. And I decided, I guess, to be a teacher at that point, right? Um, I, you know, I believe that architecture is any practice that is interested in making our spatial environment better. I'm just trying to explain why I made the decision to be a teacher and how the filmmaking practice entered it. This very simple statement, is not that easy to understand because each of these terms itself is clear, or rather, the boundaries of each of these terms itself is kind of fuzzy. You know, when I think about spatial environment, for example, right? Like a spatial environment is exactly what? What are the boundaries of this? Where does one spatial entity begin and where does the other end? Does not transforming one inevitably alter the other? Is the environment only physical? Are memory and desire deeply embedded, in our physical environment? Do we all live in the same spatial environment? Isn't it true that different people experience the same space differently, as do different species, right? And then there is the other term, better. What in the world is that? you know Better on what axis? Better for whom? Better for whom? By whom? If each of these terms themselves is ambiguous, what does architectural practice actually entail? Is it the making of buildings within the current economy? Would that not merely further and exacerbate the forces of radical environmental decay and social exclusion that seem embedded in the processes shaping our cities? Would that really be better for the spatial environment? Are there other modes of practice that are available to us as architects to attempt in improving our spatial environment? I chose to be a teacher because I believe in ideas. I believe in the importance of discourse and that conversation and debate are also essential to transform our spatial environment. And the school or the institute is the space where that conversation can be held. The school is not only a space for training architects for practice, but a space that produces architectural discourse. I use the word discourse because it implies a conversation between people, because architecture itself is a public art and cannot choose to be self indulgent. It affects the people and the planet in incredible ways, and we need to take responsibility for it. So that brings me to the heart of my presentation. You know, I have been working in many different ways in the city. Like I said, I've been teaching, you know, but I'm really interested in discourse, right? Uh, I'll just show you some of the work that I've been doing in other kinds of mediums. Of course, I've been teaching. This is some of the work that we do at the KRVIA, the design projects, the documentation projects that we are doing. I might show you one kind of, because it directly relates to a film project I'm currently working on. Yeah. I've also, of course, like I said earlier, done architecture and interior design projects, exhibition projects, people's houses, uncles and friends and their interiors, of course. I have also worked on many kind of urban design projects. These were projects that I did with the Urban Design Research Institute when I first was starting my career in the late 90s, early 2000s. And of course, I've been really involved in a lot of kind of research and publication work. This is a project called Cinema City that I was working on that really started me off on the filmmaking journey. And one of the things that I like to think of my own work is discourse itself, which is the spreading of ideas, and conversations, and engaging with ideas that can help us find what architecture should be in our particular context. Right? So lectures become an important part of that practice as such. And like I said, a lot of research projects as well. But that brings me to the heart of my presentation. So I see my practice, which is all these various things, I see all of it as an architectural practice. So it takes many different forms, teaching, filmmaking, art exhibition, lectures, curation. All of these are mediums through which I try and explore ideas within architecture, hoping to explore and probe terms we have taken for granted, and hopefully open out maybe, if possible, new avenues for pursuing, that statement earlier, a better spatial environment. Today, I have been asked to talk about my filmmaking practice, and I shall try and do that with some sort of, I guess, overlaps to some of the other work, right? It seems as if I have to categorize my filmmaking practice only. It comes into three main sort of categories. There's a entire kind of research and exhibition zone where film is used as a medium to explore documentation, representation, and communication. And of course, film itself is itself something that we are interested in researching, and its relationships with the city. The other one is films themselves, of course. I have made three films right now, and we are currently working on the fourth. And then there's curation. We curated films, me and my partner, Avijit Mukul Kishore. We curated films for many different spaces in the city. We believe that film curation and the creation of conversations around film is also an important practice that concerns film. These include an entire series of films that was called Experiments in Film Form for the Mami Festival in Bombay. We used to have for 5 years, we used to do a monthly screening at the Bhavdaji Art Museum that was called Movies at the Museum. And then there are specialized sort of curation activities that I've done with Mukul. That is called Informal Settlements in Indian Cities and some others. But today I'm not talking about my curation work. And I might not really talk about my research exhibition work either unless we have some time. I'm really going to talk about a little bit more about the films because that's really what I guess you guys are here for. So I'm going to start off with the first one at the top. It's called Nostalgia for the Future. Nostalgia for the Future was a film that was made by Avijit Mukul Kishore and I for the organization that is called Films Division India. Films Division India, for those of you who are born in the 90s and later, was an organization. I'm born in the 1970s, by the way. Was an organization that made propaganda films for the government, and they had asked us whether we would like to make a film, and we were very interested in making a film for them. So we decided we gave them a proposal to make a film on modernity and the architecture of the home, and we decided to call it Nostalgia for the Future or Kal Ka Intezar. Kal, of course, has a double meaning, whether it is the past or the future. It could be either, right? Yesterday or tomorrow. Yeah. So I'll tell you a little bit about Nostalgia for the Future first and how it emerged. Yeah. I think the main premise of Nostalgia for the Future was this. So, like I said earlier, I was born in the 1970s, 1971 actually. So my life, was almost split into half. 20 years of my life, I grew up in what can be called a socialist India. And in the 90s, in the early 90s, that world and the value systems of that world completely transformed. And it was a very exciting time also because we had all these new commodities that were coming into this country, and we were all very entertained by the idea that we could suddenly now turn on a television and watch MTV, which we had never seen earlier. But the time before that sort of became something that we started really considering, like what were those years between 1947 and 1989 or 1990. What were the value systems that we grew up in, and what was it that we were so uneasy about the contemporary world in which we are living in. And we realized actually that there was because Mukul is a filmmaker. Avijit Mukul Kishore is a filmmaker. He studied at the FTII in Pune. And him and we were having this conversation about, and he's almost my age, and we were both having a conversation really thinking about both our disciplines, whether that's architecture in my case and cinema in his case, and the ways in which in the early years of modern India, both of them were imagined as important disciplines in the service of building the nation. This, for example, are two quotations, both by our first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, in the 50s, right? Literally less than 10 years since we got our independence. On the left is him talking about architecture and saying that if human welfare is our objective, then this is bound up with the house. Indeed, changes in housing in other parts of the world have affected social revolutions in the community, and definitely architecture was going to be one of the vehicles that can bring India into the modern era, right? And on the right side, this is again him talking at the first International Film Festival of India in 52. He says that I hope that films which are just sensational or melodramatic or as such make capital out of crime will not be encouraged. If our film industry keeps this idea before it, it will encourage good taste and help pave its own way in the building of a new India. As you can see, in Nehru's mind, film and architecture were both supposed to be building blocks in the making of the great modern Indian nation. In that sense, both of them had a nation building role. So let's look at how each of them was really participating in that nation building role in the early years of modern India. This is architecture, for example. This was an exhibition held in 1954 in Delhi, in which Nehru wanted ideas in terms of how we can make low cost housing for the poor in India, right? And in this exhibition, there were many different kinds of models of housing that were created. Usually, extremely small houses made just for, so that with very minimum specifications. So because it was always imagined that India being a kind of poor country, we needed to maximize the amount of work that we could get out of the minimum amount of materials. So you had this idea that architecture was going to become part of this, and we could all look at this minimum standard of architecture and imagine that everyone in the country would have a house in which they would be living, right? There are many more examples I could have gone on with, but of course, because of the brevity that I have to make this presentation in, I shall now move on to cinema as in the service of nation building. You remember I spoke about our producers for the film Nostalgia for the Future, Films Division India. So Films Division was the propaganda wing of the government, like I said earlier, and they had the job of making an Indian citizen out of images. So they presented to us who the Indian citizen was to become. Yeah. They made films like this. Look at these names: Good Citizens, Citizens of India, This Our India, A Joint Endeavor, Young Citizens, Women and Education. Very often, very pedantic, very sometimes unfortunately boring, but also really interesting as a time capsule of a certain time in which we as Indians were coming of age. But they also, of course, besides all of these ways in which we were thinking of us to become good people, they also are looking at making films on the kinds of homes that we needed to make for these new Indians. Look at these names again, all of them interested in the minimum standard, very close to the ideas that you saw in the exhibition. Housing for the people, for you, a cheap house. Search for shelter, a house of your own, right? A growing house. Meanwhile, of course, Hindi films, mainstream Hindi films, have also been deeply involved in the making of the Indian idea. From the early years of modern India, whether you have all these films that you're seeing, Niche, Hakikat, Upkar, Mother India, all patriotic films, to even more recent ones like like Lagan and Uri. There's always a particular nation-building imagination that is at the heart of many of these films. And this image became really interesting for us, which is Jawaharlal Nehru with three of the top film stars of the 1940s and 50s, Dilip Kumar, Devanand, and Raj Kapoor. And these became important for us to incorporate this idea that these three men represented a certain kind of Indian man, Indian modern man, that we could that we were interested in. Right? Because in each of their films, they represented a different kind of modern Indian man and a certain kind of modern Indian citizen. I'll come to the differences, or maybe later we can talk about the differences. Right?
जिसमें हम जीते हैं, वो लिबास जिसे पहनकर अपने शरीर और अपने परिवार को सुरक्षित रखते हैं। अपने साथ साथ यहीं हम अपनी अभिलाषाओं और आकांक्षाओं को भी सहेज कर रखते हैं, सपने देखते हैं, और ये सपने अक्सर हमारे घरों का रूप ले लेते हैं। हम ये उम्मीद करते हैं कि हम अपने ही बनाए सपनों के काबिल निकलेंगे। हमारे शरीर अपने घरों को ओढ़ने के लायक होंगे। कुछ घर हम खुद बनाते हैं, कुछ हमारे लिए बनाए जाते हैं। सपने हम खुद सजोते हैं या फिर हमारे लिए सजोए जाते हैं।
That was the beginning of the film, and in that, there were some themes that immediately get sketched out. Um, is that we were interested in the overlap between architecture and cinema, in the way that it imagined the new citizen, in the way that it imagined the homes for new citizens. Because in each home, there's a certain idea of who's going to inhabit it. In other words, there is a metonym, a figure of speech that is happening. The nation imagines a certain kind of city, which is a mirror of the nation. The city imagines a certain kind of home, which is a mirror of the city. And the home imagines a certain kind of body. So there is a sort of, there's a presumption of a certain kind of mirroring that happens across all these four scales. And we were really interested in how this idea of the body of the citizen is reflected in the architecture of the homes, in the cities that we build, and in the imagination of the nation. So conceptually, this is what we were trying to do. One thing I need to be absolutely clear about also, is that as a filmmaker, my interest is not in making the great architecture film, which is to say, dekho Taj Mahal itna sundar hai, or even trying to say that this is the great architect. Oh my God, this genius. My interest in film is to be able to create something that can create a conversation. So these are not films with easy answers. These are not films that really have very clear messages. These are films that are provocations for us to start thinking about things and hopefully be able to evolve new ways of thinking of things that we've always taken for granted. Which is why I think that the films are more conceptual in nature rather than pedantic or pedagogic, I guess. Yeah. So let me tell you what we did next, right? You remember this nation city home body. So we decided to look at four different kinds of bodies that were imagined as the ideal citizens' bodies, and the kinds of architectures that those bodies were supposed to inhabit. And then think about what that would mean for this idea of the future that we were supposed to build for ourselves. The first body is the first home also, is a palace in Baroda called the Lakshmi Vilas Palace, built by the Maratha king Sayaji Rao Gaikwad. Yeah. Now, before independence, India was, of course, a series of these different um, princely states that were then kind of after partition cobbled together to make together what we call the called together India. But all these princely states were ruled by Maharajas, very often trained by British kinds of teachers. And they had a kind of value system that was always trying to mediate between their Indian identities and these Western value systems that they were learning from their tutors. And this created a very interesting set of, I guess you could call it a kind of way in which we were trying to become modern, trying to mediate this idea of who we are with who we want to be seen as, right? And one of the kind of kings was that, like I said earlier, Maharaja Sayajirao Gaikwad of Baroda. And he built a palace for himself. And this is the first house that we look at in the film. This is the Lakshmi Vilas Palace in Baroda. And if you look at the building itself, in the building, there is a sort of attempt to create an Indian architecture, kind of, but learning a lot from the West. Here, the body of the citizen is wearing the costume of a Indian modern idea. And the idea of Indian modern seems to be an amalgamation of architectural ideas that range from London and Venice to Rajasthan and Banaras. It's all come together in a kind of collage mode, right? You have, in fact, fountains and, marble statues of like that look kind of Greek, but you also have these arches that are, almost Mughal in nature in the building. You will have stained glass in the main Darbar hall, but in the main stained glass, instead of having, images of Christ and his story, you have Hindu mythologies. So this mediation between Indian and Western is being attempted in this particular house, right? In fact, it was this Maharaja who also sponsored Raja Ravi Verma, the great early Indian modern painter, who was creating new images of Indian gods and goddesses based on models that he had learned from the West. So images like this, which are trying to create a westernized imagination of an Indian goddess, were created by Raja Ravi Verma. He also has these various sorts of modern cool things in his entire campus. This, for example, is the train that he used to have in his palace, and now this train is now directly across in the park in Baroda, right? What is also interesting is that it was this man, Sayaji Rao, who sponsored Dr. Ambedkar's education in New York. Right. The reason why I find this interesting is because, like the Maharaja was wearing a costume of modernity, Dr. Ambedkar also, chose to wear his suits because he wanted to definitely deny and actually rebel against the caste identity that was imposed on him within traditional Hindu society. He was, of course, as you all know, he came from what was called the untouchable caste at that point, right? What's interesting is that Ambedkar also in his house uses the similar kind of modern costuming, becoming modern by wearing the clothes of modernity. For example, this is the house that he designed for himself called Rajgruha in Hindu colony in Dadar in Bombay. Right? In this building, while the buildings on the left and the right of this have these Hindu iconography, in his house, there's a decidedly Western turn that the architecture takes. The columns are, I think, Ionic in nature. There's almost like a large veranda that overlooks it. It's like a colonial bungalow with no concessions to any sort of Hindu iconography, right? Which I find interesting because it is really the idea of the home and the costume and the wearing of modernity, the architecture of the home as a costume that helps us become modern, to put it as succinctly as I possibly can, right? So this is the first house that we looked at in Nostalgia for the Future. The next house is the Shodhan Villa in Ahmedabad. And for us, this kind of house represents a certain idea of nakedness in the body, right? This, for example, is Nehru again, who, when he got Le Corbusier to design Chandigarh, this is what he said about Chandigarh itself. He said, "Now I have welcomed one great experiment in India that you know very well, Chandigarh. Many people argue about it, some dislike it, some like it. It is totally immaterial whether you like it or not. It is the biggest thing because it makes you think. You may squirm at the impact, but it makes you imbibe new ideas. And one thing India requires in so many fields is to be hit on the head so you may think." Yeah. So there is an urge and urgency for India to kind of really step into the modern world. And stepping into the modern world is not going to be easy. But once we step into that modern world, we shall be equals with everyone on earth, the same under the sun. This, for example, and he of course chose Corbusier to design that. This is the kind of imagination that Corbusier had about man and his relationship with nature, that one could be naked in the world. The sun above you, the ground beneath you, the wind against your body. And there was a way, the body was almost like a celebration of that visceral way in which, I guess, nature impacts the body. Right? And Corbusier, of course, also designed this incredible image of the Monument of the Open Hand in Chandigarh, where the where a kind of hand becomes a symbol of freedom, the open hand, against the mountains of the Himalayas. It is at this time, while he's doing this work, that he's also asked to design a house for a mill owner in Ahmedabad. And of course, that is the Shodhan House. The Shodhan House itself is an incredible, it's like a rock. It's just like a big fat cube that is just sitting there in the middle of like a large open space. And it is completely blank on one side, except for these really muscular punched in holes. You enter through a dark kind of cave-like entrance. This is the other side that completely opens out onto a garden, right? You enter through a dark cave-like entrance. You rise up like this ramp as if you're going up, like a path in the hills. You come up and you look down into this, kind of dappled kind of living space that looks like it could be in a forest, and you then rise up directly into the sky. Right? It's almost as if the house itself is staging man's journey from the cave into the sky, like from the ground to the sky. And this particular kind of, I guess, sensuality that the building evokes is the next kind of imagination that we wanted to use for this idea of the modern Indian man, right? The naked body, the body in which we are all one. The modern body is, we are all the same. The caste, gender, sexuality, um, race can all be left behind because we all belong to humanity. And this, of course, is the great myth of the modern imagination. So while the first house was about costuming, the second house became about shedding the costume. The third house we chose is Gandhi Ashram, which is in Ahmedabad again. And this, of course, is the ashram, the Sabarmati ashram that's along the river. And here we were really interested in what we call the sinful body. Yeah. Because Gandhi was really interested in, the limits to which one can think about pain and pleasure of the body. Yeah? Whether that's his long fasts or even his experiments with truth. He always felt that the body was something that was untrustworthy, because it gave you pleasure, it gave you pain. And if things give you pleasure and pain, the spirit, in other words, can be tainted. So he was really interested in stretching the limits of what the body can endure without pleasure, in terms of pleasure and pain, so that the body could then be relieved of itself until it is almost pure spirit. And the house that he lived in on the edge of the Sabarmati is really a testament to an urge for that simplicity. This, for example, is the house itself, just a simple veranda. These are drawings by Riaz Tyabji of the house, just like 4 rooms, a veranda, and that's the house, and a tiny little courtyard at the back. And even the house itself is extremely simply finished. This is his house in Barda, a model of which is there in Sabarmati. I don't know whether any of you have seen it. But they are very humble huts whose finishes are, very basic. Everything is very cheap. There's a sort of frugality to this whole architecture. And I don't know, but when I was studying architecture, there was almost an ethic to that frugality. We were supposed to be like, the low-cost housing projects that I showed you that what's his name, Nehru was talking about earlier. We were supposed to maximize what we could do with the minimum amount of materials, because it was always assumed that India is a poor country and we need to be able to be very sensitive to the way that we use our materials. So now we come to we've stripped the body. The body had a costume in the first house. The body was naked in the second house. In the third house, we even removed the body entirely until we wanted to become pure spirit. Of course, that was almost impossible to do, but nevertheless. The third body that we looked at was the body of the nation's machines, the gears that we all are. There's always a certain way in which we think about the machine as a metaphor through which we think about the nation, as if we are all parts of this large gear. You're all gears in the making or the development machine of the country. And what we chose as the house type to kind of, I guess, explore this was in Delhi. Okay. Delhi, after independence, was of course made the capital of the country and automatically had many people coming to Delhi who were going to become part of the government. And there was no housing for them. And at the same time, Delhi also received a lot of refugees coming from Pakistan after partition. So a lot of housing had to be created in Delhi in a very short period of time. And there was refugee housing that was built. And organizations like the Delhi Development Authority wanted to create mass-produced houses for the thousands and 10,000s of people who came into the city. And we were really interested in that entire kind of idea of a mass production of houses. architects like Habib Rahman, created incredible architecture within the Delhi Development Authority offices for these housing. But most of the housing that emerged in this time came from the minimum standard type that we saw earlier. And if you look at most of the public housing projects that have happened around the country, in Bombay with Mahada, or you see a similar sort of rubber stamping nature of production, because it's imagined that mass production, of course, reduces costs, makes things quicker. You have that entire discourse around mass production that I won't get into. What I'm more interested in is how the body of the citizen was also imagined as one of the gears within that kind of machine of nation building, right? These, for example, are some photographs of some of the DDA housing projects that were built. This is my partner Mukul's family, and he lived, while he was growing up, in one of those DDA flats. So this is the flat in which they lived in. That's his father and mother at the right. So I'm going to show you I'm going to show you another clip from the film. This is really where we are discussing the idea of this mass production that's there within the film. Yeah, I'm playing it now. Thank you.
गणित एक भावात्मक विज्ञान है जो इतिहास, वर्ग, जाति, धर्म और स्त्री पुरुष का भेद नहीं मानता। रेखा गणित की उत्कृष्टता और अंकों का यथार्थ विश्व को नाप संयोजित करने की क्षमता रखते हैं, मनुष्य जीवन को भी। जहां दूर दूर तक केवल अनजान खुला क्षितिज हो, हमें अंकों से सहारा मिलता है। मानव शरीर को वैज्ञानिक रूप से नापा और समझा जा सकता है। मास प्रोड्यूस्ड शरीर, मास प्रोड्यूस्ड घर।
There are some assumptions about what standards mean for working middle class life, and those are always to be kept in tension with the reality of what's going on, because it is only through that tension that you raise standards. That's the belief.
And where do these standards come from?
These standards come from a universalized notion of middle class life, which is now, what do they call it? 3 BHK, 2 BHK? What the hell does it mean? It means that the world is now living as nuclear families, where there's one place where you meet others and you eat, there's another place where you cook, there's another place where you wash yourselves and brusha, and another place where you go to sleep. This has become the norm, the universal norm, and it is actually a fossilizing of the notion of living, which starts in the 1940s in India.
शरीर देश है, देश शहर है, शहर मशीन है। हम सब इस मशीन की गलपुर्जे हैं।
नंबर बताओ। 72 नंबर जी। चलो नंबर बताओ। 12 नंबर। चलिए आपका क्या नंबर है? 16 नंबर। चलिए आप कौन नंबर? नंबर तो मालूम नहीं। कौन सा माला? तीसरा माला। नहीं चौथा नहीं ऊपर ऊपर बाबू। इस बिल्डिंग में रहते हैं और नंबर नहीं मालूम। थोड़ा मत भाई नंबर देना। हमारे साथ हमारे
I mean, I also wanted to show that clip because it gives you a sense of all the various media that we have within the film. One of the things about the film that we were really interested is the ways in which different mediums, whether that's oral or visual mediums, evoke a certain time. Like nowadays we use Instagram filters to do that, whether that's the scratch of a film, a certain texture of the film, the sound of Lata Mangeshkar's voice. Each of these are almost signifiers of different time zones. And since the film was really interested in the way that some of these ideas exist as almost hauntings of what we are supposed to become, and we are all very in the midst of these ghosts of who we want to be, we felt that it would be important for us to kind of even evoke these different kinds of textures and feelings of different kinds of, I guess, eras all happening at the same time. Eras of the future, eras of the past as well. The other thing is, of course, that the film is in Hindi and it's a sort of Sanskritized Hindi. And the reason we chose that also because that was the language that we heard in films division propaganda films while we were growing up. If we went to a cinema hall and we sat in a cinema hall, usually before the main film, before Amitabh Bachchan comes on screen, we used to get, they used to show one of these films and it was usually in this language. So it was an evocation of that particular oral time in which we were living in. But every single one of these imaginations of citizenship, homes, and nation actually comes from a sort of top down, right? But you saw that piece at the end where that's from Jagte Raho, the Raj Kapoor film, where this man who does not know the number, does not know his place within the grid of the city, is seen automatically as somebody who is a thief, is a chore, and needs to be beaten up, right? Because this is the great kind of contradiction of the nation which we are living in, is that there's these imaginations of modernity, and there are us, who are trying to live our lives, and we are all, and there's such a gap that often exists between who we are imagined to be and the lives that we are leading. But yet the desire exists. There's sort of tension between both of these, the ideal and I guess, the real. And this is what we were really interested in also exploring, the subjected body, because every single one of these ideas of modernity came from power, came from a man in power, whether that was Nehru, Corbusier, Siaji Rao, or just the bureaucracies of the nation in which we are living in. So let me tell you a story. These are in the film we use clips from each of these three films. We've already seen the Jagte Raho clip. I'm not going to show the Tere Ghar Ke Samne clip, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the clip in Amar. Amar is a Dilip Kumar film, and Dilip Kumar, as we know, always played the modernizer. He was always the man who brought modernity into the village. And in this film, he plays a lawyer who comes into the village. And in the village, he sees this beautiful nubile village belle played by the actress Nimmi. And he meets her and he's completely fascinated by her. Her chunni kind of moves away. He falls off. The chunni comes and wraps around his head, and while he's riding a horse, and then he falls off. He gets up, and then he's completely fascinated by her. And they have this sort of romantic, kind of interesting tension that's there between them, right? He is the modern man, if you remember, and she's the tribal woman. One night, Nimmi is being kind of, let's say, pursued by a local goon in the middle of the night. It's a stormy night, naturally, and she's running and she doesn't know where to go until she comes into the only place that she thinks she will be safe from that goon, and which is Dilip Kumar's house. So he barges into Dilip Kumar's room, and Dilip Kumar asks her, "Why have you come here in the middle of the night?" And she is terrified. She's just like very, very scared at this point, right? And what happens is that he then doesn't know what to do, and he rapes her. This is literally what happens in the film in the first 40 minutes. What is interesting about this film is that it seems to represent the anxiety of the middle class modernizer when he's absolutely fine doing things for tribal women when they're outside the home. When the tribal woman enters the home, he has no idea how to deal with that anxiety except through violence. And I felt like that is a great metaphor for thinking about architecture itself and its role in the making of our cities better, right? What you have here is architecture that is, this is Gurgaon. And in Gurgaon, you have these, the city is so polarized between these high rises and the people who build those high rises, right? They lie between the interstices of the city, So there's an imagination of modernity and there's the residue of it. And all of these people staring at the camera are staring at us, the middle classes, the architects who are watching this, like you are watching this, trying to imagine what does it mean to be modern? Who are you and who am I? What really is our relationship? Okay. Um, why are you looking at me and why am I looking at you? What is this relationship between modernity? What kind of body am I supposed to be in this nation of ours? Where do I lie? And what is the middle class's role in relationship with these communities? So we really wanted to kind of problematize this gaze of the modernizer, of modernity. And of course, architects and filmmakers and their role in the making of this modern nation. And that really kind of, I don't know how to put it, but really problematic kind of gaze that both architects and filmmakers have towards whom they claim to be wanting to modernize, right? So this is what we were really interested in. So while Nostalgia for the Future has these four main bodies, across the whole film, there is the subject's body, the subjected body, that is lying in the gaze of the power of the modernizer's gaze, rather. Right? So that was Nostalgia for the Future. It was an hour long, and it was very interesting and entertaining to make. And I have just enough time to introduce the next film, which is the film that Mukul and I made on architecture. It was called Lovely Villa. Right? And after that, we shall watch Lovely Villa. Right? So this is Lovely Villa. It's the subtitle of the film is Architecture as Autobiography. Right? Sorry, it's doing something. Oops, where's the problem? Yeah. Right. Sorry, I'm sorry about that. It looks like something went off. Yeah. But this is the building in which I grew up. One of the buildings in the colony where I grew up. It's an entire colony designed by the architect Charles Correa. So I've been very privileged to grow up in a Charles Correa building. This is called the Jeevan Bhima Nagar. It was built in the early 1970s in a suburb of Bombay. And, it has all of Charles Correa's important kind of architectural imaginations, the blessings of the sky, the cross ventilation. It was really a beautiful place to grow up. This is where it was. That was Borivali Station, and Jeevan Bhima Nagar was on a hill. It has mango trees in the middle, and I'm not going to tell you more about the colony because you're going to watch the film right after this. Right? But the colony was an idyllic place to grow up. These are images from the brochures that were there for people to kind of buy the houses. What is really more interesting about the colony was that it was imagined as a nation building exercise. The LIC, Life Insurance Corporation, and my parents did not buy a house, they bought a life insurance policy. And as they were paying premiums for the life insurance policy, when the policy matured, they got the house in return. So that's actually an incredible invention that was once there to create affordable housing for the middle classes in the city of Bombay. That kind of scheme itself doesn't exist anymore. I wonder why. Right? But these are the apartments themselves. They are terraces that you're seeing down there, long kind of apartments, 16 apartments per floor. And these are images from that colony. Of course, the colony has changed quite a bit. These are historical photographs that are there. This is the buildings as they are there right now, with all the additions on the terraces, etc. It's still quite a lovely place to live in. My father died in 2014, and my mother's been living there alone. I have moved out. My sister has also moved out. But I was really thinking about this idea of the house, and I thought it would be interesting to start thinking about the home, and my relationships, and how the home itself has created a relationship, the way that I see myself in the world, my relationship with architecture, my relationship with my father, and that really became the generator of this film, called Lovely Villa, right? The same spaces, for example, in which my mother's sitting right now, the spaces have changed over the 50 years that we've been living there. Um, so we're really interested in how all these different memories also have created ghosts and uh, patterns that we remember about living within this house. Right? There's me, my father, and my mother, and that's just my father. My father, came from Bangalore. He's originally from Tamil Nadu, but he was studied in Bangalore at IIT and ISC, and then he came here and took a job at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, and then moved to Borivali with my mother, and I grew up largely in Borivali. Right. So my film is an exploration of many things like nostalgia for the future. Who's also interested in layering ideas of what does it mean to be a son? What does it mean to have a father? How does Charles Correa himself become a sort of father figure? How does architecture also play a role in shaping who we want to be, and all of these ideas? Yeah. So when we were making and structuring the film, we thought we will instead of having only one voice in the film, like Nostalgia for the Future has largely one voice, this top-down voice. Um, but in Lovely Villa, we decided to have 4 different kinds of voices. There's a voice which is a historical voice, which just tells you the details of when it was built, who built it, and all of that thing. Everyday voice, which says things like, I sat here, she slept there, things like that. Nostalgic voice, I said, oh, I remember the times when, there's that voice. And there's the poetic voice that happens because sometimes language itself cannot capture memory, desire, and longing and loss. So these are the 4 voices that are there in the film. Then, like in Nostalgia for the Future, we were interested in how images themselves, like old photographs, like I showed you earlier, I guess, evoke a certain time from long ago, how different sounds come from our memory and affect the way that we experience spaces. Right? And was also interested in the fact that death is inevitable, and it's only through death that new things emerge and new ideas kind of can come up. Right? If in for every for something new to happen, something has to die. So the film is actually in many ways a philosophical meditation on the nature of identity, actually, how identity is shaped, and how identities also need to be broken. So that's what the film is trying to do. I'm going to show you the trailer, and then we can watch the film. Yeah. So this is the trailer of Lovely Villa.
Our home is the witness. It is the stage, and life is theatre. It makes us as we make it. The home is the witness, and no witness is moved.
All right. Thank you so much for that. I don't think I'm going to talk about any more projects because I think we are running out of time. So thank you everyone at IIDA. Would there be any kind of question things, or how does this work? Should I stop sharing? I can stop sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, we do have a couple of questions, and let me know like if you have time to address them.
I have
We would really appreciate it. Yeah. Also, I just wanted to say how the deep thought process that you follow and the kind of I really believe your students would be very lucky to attend your lectures. I'm
I
sure.
can ask the students.
No, no.
Absolutely.
No, I still feel so because I think even this 1 hour, I felt like this shouldn't stop. They should keep going. I mean, there are so many different narratives and perspectives that you put forth that we might not have thought about when we saw those structures. And I think that really is the beauty of it. And I really appreciate the way you conveyed your ideology and your journey. It's very inspiring.
Thank you so
So,
much. Mm.
so yeah. So basically, the this field of architecture is very artistic in nature, and it automatically puts students in a community where one is exposed to all kinds of artistic art forms. So clearly, filmmaking is one of that, and your passionate session on the same kind of showed us on how to the act of filmmaking that can expose us to think and look at built environments. So if you could talk some more about it with respect to the sorry, the students community and how one can explore how as a student or a young professional can explore and they can look and perceive beyond architecture and the kind of mold that they are put into when they are presented with the syllabus or the kind of education system that we currently have. So through architectural filmmaking, what is your take on it? Like, how can students open their mind to bigger things and greater things through this medium?
I think that's all. That's been one of the great banes of architectural education in the country is that born at a time, architecture education, of course, was born at a time when the British wanted, draftsmen and people for their buildings. So the architect was always imagined as somebody who just plugged onto the existing market, without asking questions. So the architectural education system was created so that thought was merely relegated to only what would be considered useful in that sense. And in many ways, that refused to ask questions concerning value. Is that rather
Right.
than asking, how should you build it, you should also be asking, like, for whom are we building this and what purpose does it serve and what is good? It's a really weird thing. What is good architecture? People have always assumed that it's the spectacle that makes good architecture. The more fancy the form, the better the architecture, or the more money an architect makes, or the more famous that person is, automatically the architecture is considered to be good. And that, I think, is the big. I guess it's the reason why we have such a bad reputation also in terms of architecture itself, because we have not our role is to curate a better spatial environment, and we have not taken that very seriously. Okay. We should be able to critique what the market is. We should be able to critique what power asks us to critique, right? That's what we are asked. That's our discipline. That's what we are supposed to do.
Yes, yes.
So I think that what cultural kind of, let's say, exposure allows us to do is that it allows us to see the world through stories, through different lenses, through different disciplinary narratives, through different formal structures. And that really opens ourselves out to different experiences. And if there's one thing that architecture needs and architects need, is for them to be able to gain as much from the world as possible. Architects should be like sponges learning perpetually. Too often architects find them are usually smug. हमें आता है क्योंकि वो when you go to a client, the client doesn't want to kind of have a architect to say, yeah, I'm going to learn on the job. Architect have to present that I am powerful, I know everything, even though inside we may be kind of bundles of anxiety. So I feel like cultural kind of exposure, whether that's through art, books, music, the wider you go, the better it is for architects. The more you read, the more you learn, and the better architect you can be. Both in terms of the what you know about the world, but also the skills that you get, because you can learn formal ideas from film, from art, from literature, from absolutely any single one of these incredible cultural disciplines that we have in the world. I don't know whether that answered your question.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think even as a person, as an architect, I think you have accumulated all these kind of diverse fields into your work. And you're a professor, you're a dean, like you're an academician, you're an architect, you've designed spaces, you've created films. And I think even your films are so thoughtful and so like we really appreciate it even at the office. We were discussing about your films and the kind of narrative you actually give through your films. So I think that's I think very crucial for even students to, because even we sometimes feel that there are certain things that probably might have been added when we were students back in our college days, that could have helped us pave our way a little bit towards the kind of field that we are currently in, say architectural journalism, for instance. Like we
Mm.
did, like such kind of sub fields or core, like other core fields are not really taken into consideration when we talk about architecture and its alternative practices, I would
Yeah,
say. So
yeah.
yeah, so how exactly do you think one can try and upgrade ourselves, like the syllabus or the kind of education system that we are currently.
I'm lucky to be in a school of architecture, and that is kind of quite willing to give that space. And the Bombay University syllabus has become actually very interestingly flexible. Because one thing I think the Bombay architecture syllabus, the university syllabus, has realized that that you can't have one syllabus for architecture around the country, which has all these different
Right,
contexts. That architecture means a very different thing in Gadchiroli than it does in Bombay, and means a very
exactly.
different thing in Ladakh than it does in Kerala. Your access to kind of information is, of course, there. But access to people remains limited because you can't fly people everywhere. So I feel like we have to be truthful to the place that we are occupying. That I think what happens with architecture education, and especially architects, is that we get so chucked by all these images of the latest Zaha Hadid project or the MBRDV project, that we think that is what good architecture is meant to be, a certain kind of, but we have to
Hmm.
understand that that is emerging from a very particular economy or for a very particular kind of context, right? And that may be great in
Yeah.
that context. There's nothing wrong with that. But to simply import that imagination and think that that will
Hmm.
automatically be the value system for somebody in Gadchiroli is irresponsible. So I feel that if architectural
Right.
education asks more fundamental questions concerning its role, what is architecture meant to do? I don't think we ask that question very kind of really seriously. Nah? I don't think we, like when we say architecture is supposed to make things better or good, like I'm repeating myself, but just to kind of elaborate on that, um, is if architecture is meant to be an instrument through which we make our cities better, then what is a better city? A better city is one that where we are all more free, more equal, and where there's justice, environmental justice, social justice. But do we don't architects are not involved with that. In fact, architects are doing exactly the opposite. They're making buildings that make people more alienated. They make buildings that are far more environmentally unjust than anything. So why would you call that good architecture? It may look like a Zahadi building, but it's actually architecture that is best, that is not making the world better, simply put, right? And the same thing can go for kind of questions concerning environmental systems, questions concerning histories, and I feel like those value systems jo hai na, Kamala, what are the value
Hmm.
systems of architecture? Those are some things that we need to reclaim. We need to be very, that go beyond the aesthetic, beyond the stylistic, beyond the kind of spectacle, and beyond the celebrity, to go
Right.
to the core questions concerning what do we think is a better society, and how can architecture contribute in making that better society. I'm sorry to sound kind of old-fashioned modernist, but
No, no,
genuinely,
I think that's I think that's a very deep thought. And definitely, I think architecture should definitely be community driven, like, and the community changes, like it's diverse, it's unique. And surely, I think one size fits all kind of approach would not probably take us anywhere. So yeah, totally agreed. Also, there's another question from the audience, and I think it's a very interesting one. I would like to read it out. The question says, so I noticed this yearning to understand the new costume that India wore post-independence in your films. So how do you define the current architectural costume in the country that is wearing? And more importantly, why is there a costume in the first place? Yeah,
I,
I think.
as I, let me put it this way, I have no problem with costumes. Okay. Like, I think that we wear things because we want to become what we wear. There's a way in which they
Hmm.
enable us becoming, right? As I speak somebody who is a gay man, and I know the way that drag, for example, with for many of my friends, become ways of empowering and enabling identity in the world, right? So it's an important kind of way in which costuming is an enabler. It allows us to be a certain way. We wear a certain thing, we become. I have no problem with the costume itself as an idea of becoming. My problem is the costume we are choosing to wear today. Okay. Uh,
Hmm.
the you know why is the film called Nostalgia for the Future, right? Because I believe that, at least in the early years of modern India, the costume we were wanting to wear was one of equality and justice, a certain kind of way in which we wanted to be modern citizens. In the 90s, that changed. From citizens, we became consumers. We became people who, we bought things because we wanted to, a certain kind of idea, I guess a spectacularization kind of emerged within that entire period. So my problem lies there. The reason why this film is called Nostalgia for the Future is because at this point, I think I'm nostalgic for the future that we once thought we were going to have. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, there was once a possibility of a future, and now it seems as if we live perpetually in a present. We've started confusing development for modernity, which is actually a really
Right.
interesting. We start making new flyovers and all kinds of things because they're all images of development, which is spectacular images of development. But whether they are actually ones that are making us more free or equal or just, is never asked. So my
Hmm.
entire kind of angst, if you want to put it that way, is, or rather, not. I don't think it's just angst. Actually, I don't think it's angst. I think it's more a kind of rewriting, an attempt to intervene and make a new discourse concerning value. And I think that's where Nostalgia for the Future came from. The film itself came from. I don't know whether that answers the question that was asked, but that's the
Yes,
best.
yes, yeah, it definitely does. And yeah, we were all wondering, even the audience, I mean, where could we watch all your films from? I mean, is there any platform or your website or
So YouTube has two films. YouTube has
hmm.
Lovely Villa, which you're showing, and
Yes,
Squeeze Lime in Your Eye, which was made about an artist
yes.
friend of ours. Nostalgia for the Future is on Vimeo right now. If anyone wants it, just ask me for a link. I'll send it to you. It's not a problem. Yeah.
Okay, that's very
And
kind
I'm
of you.
making, and the film that we are making right now is under production, so can't. I don't know. There was a little bit of that also I wanted to show, but that is way too much. Nahi hoga. So I said, wo chhod do.
No, no, that's actually we would really love to like we would await for it actually. So may I know when exactly it would go live or
Good question. It's a film that was much delayed because of the pandemic. It was a project that
okay.
Mukul and I are interested in. It's again around questions of identity, but in this case, I'm interested in religion. I'm not at all religious at
Okay.
all. Religion से बहुत दूर भागता हूँ मैं, because I'm, Nastic. But I'm really fascinated by the way that people construct their identities around ideas of religion and the role of architecture in the making of that identity. So we are interested in the parikrama in the area called Braj. I don't know whether you know where Braj is. Braj is between Delhi and
Yes,
Patna.
yes, yes.
There's a large
Yeah.
parikrama that is made, and that parikrama was made under the while Akbar was the Mughal ruler by a group of Vaishnavite monks. They praised it. So I was really interested in the relationship between the sacred geography and the realities of the space and the spaces in the middle. Like how do bodies perform rituals, etc. How do stories get replayed by bodies? Uh, that's the film. It's called Parikrama as of now. It may change. Parikrama, the architecture of ecstasy. That's the name of the film for now.
Oh,
It might change. Yeah.
okay. Oh, that's amazing. And I think I would speak for all. I think we would be really excited to watch it.
I'm
I would
excited to
surely
finish
connect with
making it
you.
first. Then we'll see. Then first, we have to finish making
Yes.
it. We
Yeah,
finished
yeah.
shooting. We are editing right now. So
Okay.
it's a
Okay.
long, slow edit, but
Amazing.
time like that. Mhm.
Okay, but yeah, I think it was a very, very wonderful session that we really wish wouldn't have ended
Oh,
so soon. But yeah, and you graced us today on your Sunday morning and on
it
your
was a
day
pleasure
off, and
entirely. And if anyone wants to reach out to me or contact me, I'm very easily available on Instagram and on Facebook. So, yeah,
I think that's the most wonderful part about you, sir.
architect.
And
That's me. Yeah, on Instagram.
yes, okay,
Oh, it's a fun name, no?
yes, great.
Anarchy and architect.
Yes, yes, yes. And even it's available on our official, the creatives that we have posted of you, the posters, even posters and everywhere. So, yeah, to all the audience here, I think architectural filmmaking plays a very crucial role in promoting architectural awareness and appreciation among a broader audience like you all. And through visually engaging and accessible films, architects and filmmakers can demystify the entire design process, making it more relatable to the general public. And documentaries and short films, they can surely explore the social, cultural, and environmental aspects of architecture, highlighting its importance on people's lives and communities. So by showcasing, both well-known architectural wonders and everyday structures, I think such films they can surely foster a greater sense of place and inspire individuals to take a more active interest in their built environments. And surely, Rohan sir gave an amazingly, an extremely thought-provoking insights into the field, which is greatly admired, and but probably less discussed in our fraternity. So, sir, we are really grateful to you and your valuable inputs. And I'm sure the students community and the young and the grown professionals that we had today would have a lot to learn from today's session. And thank you so much again. And we would love to have you again.
Anytime. I'm always in. I think this is part of work. Yeah. Sure.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you so much, sir. Good day. Yeah.